The Kansas City Chiefs are gearing up to appear in their 7th consecutive AFC Championship game. 6 of those AFC Championship games have been at Arrowhead, and you cannot do that as a franchise unless you can build a franchise through the draft. You don't get to buy 7 consecutive AFC Championship games. And the one place, maybe above all others, besides quarterback, that the Kansas City Chiefs drafting prowess has been proven time and again is in the secondary. I'm going to talk about 5 players here, 4 of whom were drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs, but I want to lead into it with an article from Arrowhead Pride. But at the end of this video, I have done some numbers crunching with some statistics and found something that I think should put your mind at ease heading into the AFC Championship game for one very specific reason. In an article from Arrowhead Pride titled Chiefs Defensive Backs Shined in Divisional Round Victory, subtitled In Kansas City's Divisional Round Win, the front line and secondary worked together to dominate Houston, from Arrowhead Pride by Maurice Elston, we get the following. In the Kansas City Chiefs 23-14 divisional round victory over the Houston Texans on Saturday, the Kansas City Chiefs defense recorded 8 sacks of Houston quarterback C.J. Stroud. That began with excellent coverage by cornerbacks Trent McDuffie and Jalen Watson, who played together for the first time since Watson was injured in Week 7. Remember that week, Week 7. Against the San Francisco 49ers. Per Pro Football Focus, they turned in grades of 74.1 and 72.1, respectively, to lead the team. Now, if you want anyone leading your team in coverage grades, it would be cornerbacks 1 and 2, so that is a very promising sign. Between them, they collected 4 passes defensed, and no Texans receiver caught a touchdown pass against any defender. We had way tighter coverage, noted safety Brian Cooks after the game, giving our front line a chance to get to the quarterback. Is it Brian Cook or Brian Cooks? Am I wrong that it's Brian Cook? Anyway, I will give Maurice Elston the benefit of the doubt and assume that I am incorrect here. Giving our front line a chance to get to the quarterback. Playing off each other like that really worked for us. Defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo's defensive strategy was clear, forcing Stroud into uncomfortable situations by combining sticky man coverage in the secondary with relentless pressure from the front line. Spags really trusts us. I'm having a crisis of confidence now. Have I always called him Brian Cook? Is it Brian Cooks and I have always said Brian Cook? Spags really trusts us, notes Watson, who held Stroud to a passer rating of just 60.2 when targeted. We played tight, sticky coverage so the D-line could get time to get sacks. We did a good job of that today. This synergy between the defensive backs and the pass rushers led to a dominant defensive performance that allowed the Texans just 12 points, almost 10 points below their season average. It would seem here that the Kansas City Chiefs defense is stepping things up in the playoffs. We've seen this before. Sometimes we might get beat and they'll get a sack, added Watson. Other times we'll have good coverage and give them a sack. It works hand in hand. Now, I took 5 players from this defensive backfield and broke down their numbers in what I think are the 2 most relevant games to what we're going to see on Sunday. The Houston game, which was just played, and the Buffalo game. Obviously, we're going to play the Buffalo Bills this week. In that Houston game, McDuffie was targeted 7 times. Very bold of C.J. Stroud to target Trent McDuffie 7 times. He gave up 4 completions, a 57.1% completion rate, had for 62 yards, and an 86.6 rating when targeted. That's actually pretty up there for Trent McDuffie. Trent McDuffie does not surrender very good ratings when targeted very often. If you go back to the Buffalo Bills game, however, it is a much different story. Josh Allen targeted Trent McDuffie 4 times for 1 completion, yielding a 24% completion rate for 1 yard and a 39.6 rating when targeted. McDuffie was absolutely lights out against Josh Allen. And I think part of this is that there are certain players that have who match up against other players favorably. And I think that the style of cornerback played by Trent McDuffie makes things more difficult for Josh Allen type quarterbacks. I don't think so. Josh Allen, I think I won't say he's reckless, but I think he knows his own tendencies to let it fly. And I think he knows that if you're going to just let it fly, don't let it fly towards Trent McDuffie. Right? Does that make sense? I think that's what's going on there. Justin Watson did not play against Buffalo, but Justin Watson did play last week versus Houston. He was targeted 3 times and yielded 1 completion. That's obviously a 33% completion rate for just 8 yards and a 42.4% rating when targeted. Now, Trent McDuffie is your cornerback 1. Jalen Watson, so long as he is on the field, is your cornerback 2. This is a very promising sign for the defense because we're going to talk about a player in just a few minutes here that did not fare so well basically at all down the stretch. And I've got some tertiary numbers to these to really bring into play while discussing that player. But having Justin Watson back for the Buffalo game is going to be a positive for the Chiefs over their last time seeing Buffalo, right? Brian Cooks. Thank you, Mr. Elson. Houston, he was targeted 5 times, giving up 4 completions, an 80% completion rate for 66 yards and a 118.7 rating when targeted. This, in my opinion, Brian Cooks, Justin Reed, the way that tight ends have been giving the Kansas City Chiefs problems this season is either safeties or linebackers, maybe both. But we have seen both Brian Cooks and Justin Reed struggle in coverage a little bit this year. Against Buffalo, however, Brian Cooks had a much better day. 4 targets, 2 completions, 50% completion rate, and he yielded just 25 yards with a 69.8 rating when targeted. Now, this is a recurring theme, is it not? Worse versus Houston than Buffalo. Worse versus Houston than Buffalo. Worse versus Houston than Buffalo. Justin Reed had a worse day versus Houston than Buffalo as well. 4 targets against Houston, 3 completions. That is a 75% completion rate for 49 yards and a 115.6 rating when targeted. Against Buffalo, no, it's Brian Cook. It is Brian Cook. I had to check. You have misled me for the last time, Maurice. Buffalo against, I threw myself off here. Against Buffalo, Justin Reed had 4 targets for 4 completions. That's a higher completion percentage, but for less than half the yards at 20 yards and just an 87.5 rating when targeted. The entire field here of defensive backs had a much rougher day versus Houston than they did versus Buffalo. Something worth noting. But here is the creme de la creme of examples when we're talking about how the Kansas City Chiefs lost to the Buffalo Bills. But this is not going to be I am not going to just bash on Najee Johnson here. There is a very important lesson, in my opinion, to come in just 1 second. Against Houston, Najee Johnson was targeted only twice, gave up 2 completions. That's 100% for 24 yards and a 116.7 rating when targeted. Against Buffalo, however, he was targeted 7 times, gave up 6 completions. That's 85.7% completion rate for 89 yards and a 158.3 rating when targeted. Now, QB rating is one of those weird statistics. No one knows exactly what goes into it. No one knows exactly how anything comes out of it. But 158.3 is the perfect quarterback rating. So versus Josh Allen that first time this season, Najee Johnson yielded a perfect passer rating when targeted by the Buffalo Bills fullback. He is the only defensive back on this chart, on this page, I guess it's not really a chart, I'm not that fancy with things, to surrender a worse rating to Josh Allen than C.J. Stroud. So here's the thing with Najee Johnson. I've said multiple times on this channel that I don't think Najee Johnson's all that bad. The problem is he's playing too high in the rotation. Najee Johnson was not. So during this time, Buffalo here, Najee Johnson was the second corner. Against Houston, Jalen Watson was the second corner. So against Houston, he was targeted, Najee Johnson, just twice. That's it. Because he was playing many fewer snaps. He was playing far fewer snaps. Now, Najee Johnson on the season played 494 snaps. He played 370 of those snaps after Week 8. Why pick Week 8? Well, that was so Week 7 was the Jalen Watson injury. Week 8, Najee Johnson was inactive. Week 9, Najee Johnson becomes cornerback number 2. 370 is 75% of the snaps that he took on the season. So that's kind of the benchmark for figuring out whether or not Najee Johnson really got exposed. He played 75% of his snaps after Week 8. If he yielded more than 75% of the statistical takings from Najee Johnson when he was targeted, then you would say, as he moved up on the depth chart, he was exposed. He gave up 23 completions on the season, 17 of them after Week 8. That's 74%. He gave up 365 yards on the season when targeted. 324 of them were after Week 8. That's 88%. He was targeted 74% of the time after Week 8. 74% of his targets were after Week 8. Or completions were after Week 8. 88% of the yards. So you're not necessarily seeing him give up more receptions. You're seeing him give up higher value receptions. You're seeing him, instead of giving up a 4-yard reception to the number 3 receiver, you're seeing him give up a 20-yard reception to the number 2 receiver. Now, prior to stepping onto the field as a starter, Najee Johnson gave up a quarterback rating when targeted over 100 0 times. Even though he was giving away fewer receptions. If you're giving away fewer receptions, fewer targets, fewer plays, it would be easier for a quarterback to score a perfect rating against you while you were on the field. You were not on the field that often. So 0 times prior to Week 8. Now, luckily, Week 8's around halfway in the season, so we have a pretty good dividing line. He gave up a rating of over 100 4 times, including the playoff game versus Houston in the weeks since Week 8. So here's what's happening to Najee Johnson. He's just not a cornerback 2. When you're a wide receiver 2, when you're a wide receiver 1 in the NFL, most teams that have a competently built wide receiver room, the wide receiver 1 has some very serious skills, talents, measurables, etc. Most wide receiver 2s so you've got skills, you've got talents, you've got measurables. Most wide receiver 1s have the whole trifecta. Most wide receiver 2s have 2 of the 3. There is something keeping them from being a wide receiver 1. So you have 2 of these things, you're going to be able to beat Najee Johnson more often than a wide receiver 3. That's what's happening here. Now, why do I go through this whole spiel? Well, simply the fact that Najee Johnson will be the number 3 cornerback against Buffalo this time around. Najee Johnson much more competent at the number 3 cornerback role. He's not 6'2" and has the size and the speed and the skills that Justin Watson does. Justin Watson will be the number 2 cornerback for these Kansas City Chiefs. With Najee Johnson being pushed down a notch on the pecking order here at cornerback, we have seen a team that pushed this defense to the limit yards-wise in Houston. Pushed this defense to the limit tempo-wise, I would argue, in Houston. Houston had a decent game on a per-snap basis versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Houston had a decent game against the Kansas City Chiefs with statistics like rating when targeted for these defensive backs. The Chiefs lost the first game against Buffalo. They did not have Jalen Watson. These defensive backs did a pretty good job against most of the targets for Buffalo, with the notable exception of Najee Johnson. Now, Najee Johnson is going to be pushed one spot down the pecking order and replaced by Jalen Watson. Jalen Watson, who, of all the defensive backs, had one of the better days against Houston. Jalen Watson is a real talent. He's returning for the game against Buffalo, and it would not shock me if his return is one of the deciding factors that allows the Kansas City Chiefs to get over on the Buffalo Bills this time around. That is all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other Kansas City Chiefs fans. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, the Kansas City Chiefs are the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week, and I hope to have you back for the next one.